Welcome to The Poetry Joint, a podcast about poets, poems, and poetics. My name, Stephen Donahue. I have a scant knowledge of poetry, and that is the starting point for this podcast, to see what I can learn.
There's a light on in the attic. I can see it from the outside, and I know you're on the inside. Looking out.
Exploring good poetry, bad poetry, sonnets, couplets, ballads, rhyme, no rhyme, grand verse, silly verse, concrete poetry, liquid poetry, words with meaning, words without meaning, old poets, young poets, radical poets, ancient poets, contemporary poets, confessional poets.
Angel-headed hipsters, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night.
The Poetry Joint. Hang out. See where we go. This episode of the Poetry Joint, I am going wandering through the bits and pieces of poetry and conversations with poets about their poetry, with much appreciation of the poets who have donated their time for conversation and the poets who speak to us from back in time with their poems. Terence Allen Patrick Sean Milligan was born in India in 1918. His poetry often leaned towards the nonsensically comical side of the poetry equation.
On the ning ning nong, on the ning ning nong, where cows go bong and the monkeys all say boo, there's a ning nong ning ning where the trees go ping and the teapots gibber at Jew, and on the nong ning ning, all the mice go cling, and just can't catch 'em when they do. So it's ning ning nong, cows go bong, nong ning ning, trees go ping, nong ning ning, the mice go cling. What a nicey place to belong is the ning 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 nong.
That reading by Everett Donahue, the poem's author, better known as Spike Milligan. This author spent World War II with the British artillery in Italy and North Africa. In the war, he was hospitalized with injuries and shell shock, now called post-traumatic stress disorder. He achieved notoriety as a writer and actor for the BBC 1950s radio show The Goon Show with Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe. Later in life, he was diagnosed with and suffered from manic depression, now called bipolar disorder. Another short poem by Spike, this one called The Mirror Running. This evening, in the twilight gloom, a butterfly flew in my room. Oh, what beauty, oh, what grace. Who needs visitors from outer space? I recently had a conversation with Toronto poet Patrick Connors. Patrick has just released his second book of poetry in 2024. It's titled The Long Defeat by Mosaic Press. Here is Patrick in his own words talking why poetry.
Poetry is musical. Poetry has a resonance in the air and in the heart that other literary forms and other art forms don't have. Poetry can be so many things. Yes, there are many wonderful esoteric poets who just blow the words off the page and blow your mind when you're listening to them. But you can also have very accessible poetry that speaks to everyday people, and that's what I strive to do. I'm part of the people's poetry. I'm sort of like the next generation of the people's poetry movement that was started by folks like Milton Acorn and Raymond Souster and Al Purdy. And what I love is I love people who hate poetry to come up to me, and like I'll do a set of poetry at a bar that's mostly music, and they'll be like, "Oh, a poet," and then some person will come up to me and say, "You know what? I hate poetry, but I didn't hate what you did." And that's why I do what I do. That's why poetry for me.
In the course of our conversation, Patrick was kind enough to read this poem.
Thank you. So the sort of title poem is called "The Long Defeat That Brings Us What We Know." That is a line from a poem that I read by Muriel Rukeyser, excuse me. I did a lot of reading as well during the early stages of the pandemic, whether it was poetry or poetry craft or biography or whatever, and I was learning a little more than I already had about different things and about the world. And she wrote a wonderful poem called "Neruda the Wine," and right in the middle of that poem is the line, "The long defeat that brings us what we know." And I'm like, wow, that just reading that line just blew the top of my head off and immediately got me into writing this poem. He loves the beach. He walks barefoot along the shoreline, as close to the water without getting wet, while as far away from people as possible. Like every man, he experiences loss, failure, isolation, accusations, numerous as the grains of sand between his burning toes. The beach is where he finds peace. It is his favorite place to pray to the one who formed this beauty as a gift to all who would receive it. He prays for the world which once again suffers so much. He prays it will not be swept away by rising tides of hatred. He prays for his family. He prays for his friends. He prays for his enemies. He prays to be able to tell the difference. He rests at the end of a concrete pier. "I have not been overcome," he proclaims to the setting sun, "and that will have to do for now."
We'll have more of our conversation with Patrick on another episode. This next poet, Jeanne Kwong, has been a longtime volunteer at CJSW. She has been the dynamo behind the CJSW program Writer's Block and Arts Link. Last year, she published a book of poetry titled City Beats, Poems and Photos. Here she reads one of her poems.
Poetry is something that has my interest in it has gained, I guess, ups and downs in my interests. Sometimes I will focus on fiction, and sometimes I'd be more interested in poetry. It depends on the season, maybe the timing, and that time in life when I want something a little more direct, maybe not direct, but also a little faster to digest, I guess. Yeah. And so I've been reading poetry off and on from the Tang Dynasty. I have a small volume of Tang Dynasty poems that I will return to again and again, because it's something that I feel is something that I will be learning throughout my life, and not just one moment in time. And so it's knowing and growing up with a language background, that, and also trying to nurture it and expand my understanding of it. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Here's a poem. This poem was inspired by a workshop that I did, where the leader of the workshop, she wanted me to write a land acknowledgement that would be personal to myself, and something that wasn't too official in the sense that we hear it all the time now. But so this is that is through that course that got me inspired to write this poem still. It's called Toisan Colors and Drums. From one hometown to another, the distance and time, ocean, forests, and mountains, between when my mother stepped onto the airplane 40 years ago from Toisan to reach this place called Kawi. Live, love, work, play, grow old, colors fly and the beat of the drums. Aunties march in Wa Sam Dong Do on the 100 years of Chinatown. The decades have passed by and we are here, marching in the streets, colors fly, and the tapping of the drums. From the hill town near the South China Sea to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. This place known in Blackfoot as Mokinsis. This is the place I am. This is the place I want to be. Here with you on this dance floor underneath the lights, the colors, the sounds, the whispers, and the beat of the drums, the voices, the movements of people around us.
Susan Musgrave released some collected poems from 1985 to 2000 in 2009. The collection was titled Where the World Is Not Our Home by Thistledown Press. She has allowed me to read this poem. Things that keep and do not change. Out on the windy Gulf breakers, like bouldery sheets of laundry, tumble and spin towards the horizon in my sleep. We've been fog-bound for 3 days, and I've learned the difference between bad ice and good, how to travel in a blizzard, using the wind to set your course. One night I woke, and a white shadow was trying to get into bed with me. My tongue went numb, and the only words I could remember came out cold. I used to think white was no color at all, only your absence making itself known. Your ghost, doubling back to pull down my stiff winter underwear from our drooping clothesline, little thief. When they found you, the foam on the beach after the north wind blew all night was white and deep. We've been fog-bound for days, and I've learned to set my course on the wind. Susan has an excellent website, susanmusgrave.com, which provides much more extensive detail on her life and her writing. Susan on the West Coast, Susan on the Haida Gwaii. Ontario poet Lisa Reynolds this year has released a chapbook of poetry titled Pearls of Rain. This poem she contributed to the Poetry X Hunger Project, which we featured on a previous episode of the Poetry Joint. Lisa Reynolds.
I'm hungry. The words aren't spoken. They're said through eyes that watch others eat, longing for a carrot, piece of apple, potato chip. Alone by choice they sit, gulp water, devour bread without protein, always craving more. To hide envy, they fidget in desks, search backpacks, while waiting for recess to begin.
I haven't had an opportunity to have a conversation with Lisa Reynolds. This poem from her chapbook, Pearls of Rain, titled You and Me. Caught in a circle of hellos, we avoid each other's eyes, side hug, and pretend we were never more than we are now. And yet, in that brief moment when you drew me in, I heard your breath hitch the way it used to before we kissed. I came across a book titled Poems of the Canadian West by an R.F. Adams, published by Evans and Hastings of Vancouver in 1919. I have very little information on E.F. Adams, except that he had just returned from fighting in World War I. He lived on the prairie and later moved to the West Coast. Titled Peace by the River. Peace here by this silent river, after war's clash of shattering towers, after the long night's dark endeavor, and ghastly dawn, and death-long hours. Here memories call from peaks mist-folded, and incense drifts from cedar and pine, and maples that lie in valleys being molded, drink from the flood of sunset wine. And thou, the glory of all beholding, doth sweep the mist from watching eyes. This is the hour of grimly holding the faith that looks to a new sunrise. One of the poems who influenced Patrick Connors was Mick Burrs, also known as Stephen Michael Berzensky. He was Los Angeles born, came to Canada in 1965 to avoid being drafted into the Vietnam War. He resided for many years in Saskatchewan, was writer-in-residence for the city of Yorkton. This bit from a documentary titled Real Live Poet.
Knowing my poems cannot save me, I drop my heavy suitcase of words and keep on pacing, looking for wisdom in the eyes of friends and strangers. Knowing my poems cannot save me, I awake each day for my travels to heaven, walk the streets disguised as no one, and find even the smallest creatures are clothed in light.
Patrick Connors also mentioned Milton Acorn as one of his influences. Here's an Acorn poem titled Live With Me on Earth Under the Invisible Daylight Moon. Live with me on earth among red berries and the bluebirds, and leafy young twigs whispering, within such little spaces, between such floors of green, such figures in the clouds. The two of us could fill our lives with delicate wanting, where stars past the spruce copse mingle with fireflies, or the dayscape flings 1,000 tones of light back at the sun. Be any one of the colors of an earth lover. Walk with me and sometimes cover your shadow with mine. Milton Acorn from a 1983 collection called Dig Up My Heart, Selected Poems, published by McClelland and Stewart. May 18th, 1980. Mount St. Helens in Washington State near Portland, Oregon, exploded in an eruption that shot lava, pulverized rock, and hot gases outward some 30 kilometers, sheared trees off, created landslides, and also released wicked downstream flooding from melting glaciers and snowpack. A mushroom-shaped column of ash rose 19 kilometers into the sky. For 9 hours, the main eruption ran. Ash from the eruption darkened nearby areas, and ash clouded the sky as far as southeastern Saskatchewan, where I was living at the time. The ash filtered the sunlight to a dusky red. This poem, from someone more intimately familiar with Mount St. Helens, before and after.
Cinders and Flowers. The north side of Mount St. Helens gapes wide open where it blew out in 1980 and left this scrabbly strew of gray and white pumice, glaring in afternoon sun and crunching beneath my bootsteps. 10 years before the mountain exploded, I stood on the snowy summit one summer afternoon and shouted my joy down to the expansive earth. Since then I have earned an unhappy back, an ankle that pains me with every step, a titanium knee, a shoulder of bone-rubbing bone. Please tell me, believers in the resurrection of the body, which one? Oh, I'd take again the youthful version were he offered, though not if his angst and confusions came with him. And I'm pretty sure this creaking frame could bear me up the mountain to search him out. But why? That peak where he stood and hollered, wanting nothing that was not there, is not there. The blowout left him and the 40 years between us in windy space, a quarter-mile above the crater rim. If that boy is to live again, he will have to do it down here, in this body of complaints trekking a blasted plain, a country born dead, but not dead now. Gophers swam up from their havens, stirring the grit and pebbles. Bunch grasses sunk roots, willows, shrubs, and saplings, sparrows and flycatchers nesting among them, have taken hold by the snowmelt stream that pours from the mountain's core. And now, this late July, riots of blossoms have exploded all over. Blue lupin, penstemons pink and purple, Indian paintbrush of the deepest orange, in clumps where I walk, and hazing the farther slopes in soft pastels. I'm glad I stood on that summit once, if indeed it was me, but where, on a mountain top, are the birds and flowers? I am happy enough to saunter along in my gimpy way here below, where I see not as far, but stand and scale with small beauties making the most of their moment, my legion of pains never failing to report that, like the mountain, I am alive and finding my way.
That was the poem Cinders and Flowers by John Daniel from the online site terrain.org, an article put together called Mount St. Helens in Poetry and Prose from 2013. April is National Poetry Month in Canada and the USA. October is National Poetry Month in the United Kingdom. World Poetry Day is March 21st. National Poetry Day in Scotland is the first Thursday of October. This following poem was read for National Poetry Month 2024 in the United States on behalf of the Academy of American Poets.
Hi, I'm Patricia Smith. When I was about 20 years old, my father died, and my father was the center of my world. I'm an only child. My mother was like the functional parent. My dad was the really cool blues singing, I was going to say alcohol guzzling, but never you mind that. And so when my dad died, my whole life just came to a standstill. And since I was a poet, I was trying to write the definitive "My Father is Gone" poem. I wanted to write one poem that would teach you everything you needed to know about my father so you would miss him as much as I did. Then I realized the best way to write a poem like that is not to write a huge poem, but to write one about a moment. And that moment would typify your relationship, and that's where this poem came from. It is called When the Burning Begins. It is about the first thing I ever cooked with my dad. The recipe for hot water cornbread is simple. Cornmeal, hot water. Mix till sluggish, then dollop in a sizzling skillet. When you smell the burning begin, flip it. When you smell the burning begin again, dump it onto a plate. You've got to wait for the burning and get it just right. Before the bread cools down, smear it with sweet salted butter and smash it with your fingers. Crumble it up in a bowl of collard greens or buttermilk. Forget that I'm telling you it's the first thing I ever cooked, that my daddy was laughing and breathing and no bullet in his head when he taught me. Mix it till it looks like quicksand, he'd say, till it moves like a slow song sounds. We'd sit there in the kitchen laughing at my mother, who was probably scrubbing something with bleach or watching Bonanza or thinking how stupid it was to be burning that nasty old bread in that cast iron skillet. She always used whole milk and eggs and baked her cornbread until it was plump and sugary. And she branded me hopeless as a homemaker, too interested in sitting in the kitchen in the half dark, learning nothing at all from a man who had other women and stayed out late on Saturday nights. When I told her that I'd fixed my first ever pan of hot water cornbread and that my daddy had branded it glorious, she sniffed and kept mopping the floor over and over in the same space. So here's how you do it. You take out a bowl, like the one we had with blue flowers and only one crack. You put the cornmeal in it. Then you turn on the hot water and you let it run while you tell the secret about the boy who kissed your cheek after school, or about how you really want to be a reporter instead of a teacher or a nurse like Mama said. And the water keeps running while Daddy says, you will be a wonderful writer. And when you get famous, if I sent you some money, would you write about me? And he is laughing and breathing and no bullet in his head. So you let the water run into this mix until it moves like mud moves at the bottom of a river, which is another thing Daddy said. And even though I'd never even seen a river, I knew exactly what he meant. So you pour this mix into the skillet. That stuff pops something awful when it first hits that blazing skillet. And sometimes Daddy and I would dance to those angry pop sounds. He let me rest my feet on top of his while we waltzed around the kitchen, and my mother huffed and puffed on the other side of the door. When you are famous, Daddy asked me, will you write about dancing in the kitchen with your father? I say everything I write will be about you. Then you will be famous too. And we dip and swirl and spin, but then he stops and sniffs the air. The thing you have to remember about hot water cornbread is to wait for the burning so you know when to flip it. And then again, so you know when it's crusty and done. Then eat it the way we did, with our fingers, our feet still tingling from dancing. But remember that sometimes the burning takes such a long time. And in that time, sometimes, poems are born.
Patricia Smith is a poet, a spoken word performer, a four-time champion of the National Poetry Slam. She's an author, a teacher, City University of New York and Princeton, and worked in journalism for a while. She has many online profiles and a website, wordwoman.ws. I'll put a link on the Poetry Joint Facebook page.
Blue Shell by Kelsey Madden. The first time you saw a baby robin beneath an oak tree, did it leave a mark on you that no one else can see?
Any hour of any day, of any week, of any month, of any year can be your poetry day. If you want to read a poem, listen to a poem, or write a poem. Thanks for listening to the Poetry Joint. Hopefully you have enjoyed these poems and poets. This is Stephen Donahue. Back in a month's time, we'll just fade out with a little bit more from Mick Burrs and the documentary Real Live Poet.
When the true poet comes home from work starving, he says to himself, "To hell with this obligation to my stomach," and sits down and heats up a poem on the burner of his soul.
And the winner of the Poetry Award is Variations on the Birth of Jacob by Stephen Michael Berzensky.
Now I'm going to be able to afford to get a haircut.